Welcome to the Gus Alva Perspective, a videocast that's earmarked to embrace the mindset of gratitude and abundance over the concept of fear and scarcity, which unfortunately paralyzes individuals and is oftentimes the very material that is being fostered in the current society that we live in right now. As a board certified psychiatrist, it's very important for me to educate not only my patients, but certainly also to be able to distill among colleagues and peers the fact that we can make an enormous difference by simply helping people reframe their thoughts. The theme that I'd like to touch on in this particular videocast is that of situational awareness. You might not have necessarily thought about this, but there's a very important component associated with having an awareness of your surroundings. Think about this. How many times have you stepped out of your house and looked around and taken a close perspective of everything that's around you? Oftentimes, we see that other people, ourselves, might actually be culprit of doing this, but walking about in an aloof manner, not necessarily being aware or cognizant of our very surroundings. Sometimes people are so engrossed with looking at their phones or looking for something that they might actually place themselves in jeopardy. Let me give you some examples of that. Just today, I was driving to the office, and all of a sudden I saw that somebody was putting on their makeup by looking at themselves through the rearview mirror of their car and applying eyelash liner. And if you've never seen that operation being done, it's quite a laborious task. It's not an easy one. And that is just one example where sometimes people run into problems. Have you ever noticed somebody maybe texting while they're driving or looking down at trying to create some sort of a change on their maps or other applications as they are driving? Well, that creates a bit of a dangerous situation, not just for that person, but for others around them. It's no coincidence that, one of the deadliest weapons out there are vehicles or cars, because there's a potential great set of damage that can come about from tons of metal hurtling at somebody that is either on a bicycle or on a motorcycle or on foot. And it's relatively easy to, not necessarily being inebriated or abusing a substance, whether that be alcohol or marijuana or any other illicit substance, but simply just not necessarily having that situational awareness of other people around oneself. That becomes a very important thing. Let me give you another example of this. I recall our eldest daughter before she left for college. One very important thing that I wanted to impress upon her was that, sometimes this world is not necessarily kind to all. And we certainly see stories of, individuals that are abducted. There's a very serious connotation of human trafficking. So there are some very serious themes that we oftentimes don't want to look at because they are so scary, but they are prevalent. And so the important thing for me as a father was that my daughter had the appropriate instruction to be able to take care of herself. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to impress upon her was that should somebody try to hurt her, they should figure out within a few seconds that she was not prey, but she was actually a predator. And let me give you a backdrop associated with that. When I was young, my brother was very much into martial arts. He loved karate. And so he kind of drugged me into doing some of that with him. In medical school, in fact, I decided to actually take on doing some karate, but that didn't turn out so great. It did, however, teach me some good discipline and also helped me along the lines of some basic tenets associated with being able to defend myself. And part of the reason for learning martial arts or any other endeavor, whether it be, extreme fighting or otherwise, is to simply make sure that you know how to defend yourself. You should never utilize a skill set like that to intentionally try to hurt someone else. But for me, the easiest thing for Addie, my eldest, was to basically say, hey, listen, what do you think about maybe joining a sport called Krav Maga? And for those of you that might not know this, Krav Maga is a form of martial arts that was invented by the Israelis. And it's basically a dirty type of fighting, but it's a very effective form of fighting. And it's a very effective way of paralyzing somebody that is intent on hurting you. The reason that I also suggested this was that it would provide a phenomenal opportunity for my eldest and myself to actually be able to partake in some, great exercise together and build a rapport, build a relationship with one another. Now, it was a little interesting because obviously when we were sparring within the class, that meant that, she was hitting my cushions or mats and I was hitting hers. So I obviously had to temper the overall tempo of what I was doing in conjunction with some of the lessons that we were learning together. And I'll tell you, it was a phenomenal experience. But the reason that I'm sharing this is that it was very important for me to instill upon her the basic knowledge to know that if somebody were intent on hurting her, whether that was to drag her into a car or to do something that obviously she didn't agree to, that she could potentially immobilize somebody and remind them that she was not just going to sit idly by and allow something bad to happen to her. And you hate to think about this, but it's something that we obviously need to help educate our children about how to take care of themselves and how to watch over themselves. And that becomes another important theme because it ties in with this scenario associated with situational awareness. For those of you that have walked through a dark alley, in a strange city, well, obviously we're hyper aware of certain places where we need to be careful. But if you think about this, this is certainly a theme that we should always be aware of. In the process of different types of tragedies that have occurred around us, whether it be a mass shooting, whether it be, some individual that has specific problems that are now trying to be spilled out over onto others, well, we should always be having on the forefront of our minds the safety not only of ourselves, but our loved ones as well. And the best way of doing that is through situational awareness. Oftentimes, individuals that are well steeped in this arena will state that there are certain circumstances that might come along the lines of different color gradients from green to yellow to red, and certainly in the yellow and red terrain, to be a little bit more focused, to be a little bit more aware, to be a bit more intentional about being vigilant regarding our surroundings. Certainly a theme that applies to all of us, and certainly one that we should keep in mind. A theme that oftentimes we don't want to think about. Because if we spend too much time thinking on the fact that we need to be hyper aware in certain circumstances, that makes us realize that the world around us isn't necessarily as safe as we want it to be. And it's one thing to live in a fairy tale and dismiss many of the things that are happening around us, but it's another that we are practicing being responsible about our safety and that of our loved ones. In the past, I've made mention of taking part in different types of sports, including being out on the road. I was speaking with a friend today, and he is a motorcycle driver. And sometimes we see traffic jams where all of a sudden we see motorcyclists that are splitting lanes. And certainly they're able to do that. It's not necessarily the safest thing to do. And that's one of the things that I was discussing with this friend. But sometimes motorists get upset over the fact that somebody's actually making headway and intentionally try to close those lanes and potentially evoke an accident in somebody that is simply trying to get from point A to point B. That situational awareness certainly applies to somebody that's on the road on a motorcycle, but it's not exclusive of that person. It is certainly a theme that ties into all of us, and it's an important one. Like I said, we don't necessarily want to think of this. We want to think of our safe spaces, whether that be our home, whether that be our workspace, whether that be visiting with people that we know well and in whom we might be able to feel a sense of comfort being next to. But in the current lay of the land where we live, I'd say that a greater sense of gratitude comes from a fact of being prepared. And the only way of being prepared and having a preparation set in mind is to actually have an awareness of what's going on around us. If we're spending too much time doing this, simply looking at our phones, we lose that buffer that, should certainly always be there to make sure that we are aware of anything that might potentially create a problematic issue for us or our loved ones. So as Mate mentioned, instead of living in fear about what might subsequently happen, we can actually have this preparedness sense by being aware of our immediate surroundings and keeping in mind something that's relatively easy to do, and that is to have a sense of situational awareness. I thank you for spending some time with us right now on the Gus Alva perspective. Simple themes, but certainly themes that are applicable in the life that we live right now. Thank you.